You might have to select your. Yeah.
Yep, there we go. There's my mic. This time I checked. Before, when I was recording these, I like would not check, and then I'd look at the video later, and then it would be no microphone. So awesome, so cool. Okay, well, welcome everyone. So, my name's Coach Green. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about two different concepts. So the first one I want to really talk about is there are 5 different characters on a team, right? Can anyone in the audience tell me what those five roles are? Does anyone know anything? Well, we'll start with the simple, which is like there's 3 different roles, right? In the game.
Tank.
Yep, tank is one.
Support, DPS.
Yep, those are the other 2. So that's what the game differentiates it. But in pro level play, it gets differentiated a little more, just for the sake of ease. And the delineation of what these roles are comes down to typical meta patterns. But of course, you're never completely limited to these certain hero pools. It's just oftentimes this is what is done, and especially in Overwatch 2, it's gotten a lot more weird. Where like people are playing weird comps, and there's new heroes being added that make the roles weird. But tank is pretty easy because there's only one person on the role. So literally tank just, I mean, you're kind of expected to play all of them to some degree, but really it comes down to your strengths within a certain archetype, which we'll kind of get into later. In Overwatch 1, there were 2 tanks, and so the delineation between the 2 was main tank and off tank. So the off tank was the one, just for like the history's sake. It was Diva, Sigma, and some Zarya, and like maybe Roadhog sometimes if you're like, but also Roadhog is kind of main tank. And then in Overwatch 1, main tank was Reinhardt, Winston, Ball, Orisa, and yeah, we didn't have a lot of these other fun little guys here. But now it's just tank, which makes it a lot easier. So even today in pro play, you'll actually notice that a lot of there's still some lingering truth behind those roles, because sometimes you'll have in pro play players who kind of specialized in certain characters, like Diva, Sigma, Zarya, who will sub in for a map to play those characters. So it's like they're playing the off tank player is playing the tank for that map. Is like sometimes how it's done. It really depends on the team, but yeah, specialization in tanks is pretty important in Overwatch 2. But anyway, as you move on to the DPS, the delineation is. Does anyone know the difference? The 2 different DPS roles? Anyone?
Hit scan and the other one.
Yeah, correct. The other one. No, hit scan and flex DPS. So let's start with hit scan because it's pretty self-evident what that would mean. So, what do you guys think hit scan means? Like, which characters would that be?
Ash, Cassidy, Soldier,
Right.
Widow.
All the characters that literally have hit scan, and if you don't know what hit scan is, when you shoot, it fires like that. Flex DPS. So yeah, that's hit scan, and then the other is flex DPS, or also sometimes called projectile DPS, right? Which is also pretty self-explanatory. A character like Echo, notice how I'm shooting; it's taking time to travel. And oftentimes, the way it kind of usually works is, usually the hit scan will kind of output more raw damage, but usually the flex DPS will usually provide some sort of utility. Like for example, a Maywall, right, has the ability to sort of isolate people, or Mei has the ability to kind of like have that extra survivability, or Sombra, you know, she's got the hack which can disable the enemies for a little bit, but she's also an assassin, right? So it doesn't always necessarily have to work like that. Like for example, Hanzo's still going to do a bunch of damage, even though he's mainly a projectile character, right? But that's just the general sort of consensus. And Also, one of the biggest exceptions is Tracer is usually in the highest level play played by a Tracer or fuck hit scan. Tracer is usually played by hit scan, but I'm gonna be honest with you. If you're a pro level player, everyone should know Tracer, because there will be metas where sometimes you just have to play Tracer, and she's always good in a lot of ways. So Tracer important, keystone character. But for more specifics, so hit scan would usually be Ashe, Sojourn, Cassidy, Soldier, Tracer, Widowmaker, and Reaper, technically. And I guess Bastion as well. So these characters are all hit scan, but they also fall into what the typical meta patterns would be in terms of which characters you pick. So for that leaves for flex DPS or projectile, you'd get Echo, Genji, Hanzo, Junkrat, Mei, Pharah, probably Venture, Torbjorn. Sim is actually more hit scan usually because the hit scan is usually what gets replaced by a Symmetra in a comp. Like you, if you're going like you're, for example, really the only comp that you'd run Symmetra would be like a Rein comp, because if you're a Reinhardt, if you get teleported like right on top of the enemy, that's usually pretty good, right? So usually the sim will play that role, and then there's like the other DPS will usually play like a Mei, for example, to like block an angle while you go push someone else. But so Sim's a little bit of that exception. So she's usually hit scan, and then Sombra's usually projectile, and yep, that's basically it for the DPS role. Again, like I said, these are not hard and fast rules, but these are just general delineations where that's basically how it'll usually go. And then as for support, does anyone know what they are?
It's like main and flex.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, main and flex. So main and flex, the names came about when the support roster looked like, hold on, let me look. Zenyatta, Mercy, Lucio, Symmetra, maybe you could count Ana. There was like 3 supports when the game came out. 4 supports, and one of them didn't heal. Symmetra did not heal you. Yeah. So usually, the reason it's called main support is because Lucio was such a fundamental and foundational character to the game that Lucio was the main support. It like dictated the entire playstyle of the game with the speed and the aura heal, right? So that's why it was kind of considered main, and then the flex support would be the one that would switch between like the Mercy or the Zen or the Ana, right? But that actually also kind of changed. So now flex support is specifically, I mean, mostly it's Lucio Brig on the flex support in pro level play. Sometimes you'll get a Lari, and then, or sorry, yeah, main support will sometimes play Lari, but usually flex support will play either Ana, Baptiste, Alari, Kiriko, Zen, Lifeweaver. There's a lot of flex support characters, but oh, and then Moira, Juno. I believe, I don't know yet. I haven't seen enough pro level play with Juno to like get a full understanding of how like Juno's gonna be played, because it's just. I think the Juno seems to fit more of like a flex, but it's kind of hard to say, honestly. But even
I think I think Crazy Records played them like yesterday, 2 days ago.
played Juno.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I'll have to take a look.
Sorry.
Yeah, what's up?
Determines a flex and main support.
So usually, oftentimes the main support is the one who will be doing what's called peeling. So like if I'm playing Brig and you like one of the most iconic deep support duos in the game is Brig Ana, right? So Ana would be the flex support and Brig would be the. Here, let me actually real quick just make sure that I see my Discord on the other screen. Okay, yeah, we're good. So, one big example of a support core that's like really strong is Brig Ana, because what the Ana tends to do is she tends to have the sort of fight winning like utility that says like, I'm gonna stand on this high ground and then I'm gonna like throw this nade and I'm gonna anti someone and we're gonna like execute on that, right? Or like maybe you just hit a cross map nade and now your entire team is like rolling this guy, right? So Ana would like to use her abilities aggressively to get value offensively, right? But she kind of has to be careful not to like use everything, because if she has no cooldowns and then she gets jumped by like a Winston, she's dead, right? So oftentimes to help mitigate this problem, that's sort of like oftentimes what the main support does, where like if I'm playing Brig and like I'm standing up on this high ground and my Ana just used both cooldowns, then if I like boop the Winston and then bash away and I like can pack my Ana, right? Then I can help her live the engagement and I can sort of create distance so that my Ana has more chance to live. That's oftentimes what the main support is like better at doing. And then another like big example of a main support doing this is like if you're playing Lucio and you're playing in one location and you're going for a duel, but then you notice, oh, my teammates over here are dying. I'm gonna like amp heal them, or there's my teammates over here. I need to boop this guy so that we can run out this way, right? So it's a similar concept where like, oh, I just messed up my game. Whoa. Okay. So it's a similar concept where like Lucio is not necessarily going to be like confirming kills, although his boop definitely can do that in the right situation. Don't get me wrong, but he's more often than not will buy time and give utility elsewhere, right? So that's sort of the difference between main and flex support. And then also Mercy is also good at peeling, because like literally she can just fly to someone and just heal them, right? And just pocket them.
Also, it wasn't the Crazy Raccoon. It was Zeta versus Falcons in that. But
Oh,
they
really?
both played her at times. Yeah.
What do you know, like what maps?
It was, I think it was Suravasa,
Suravasa.
Lijiang Tower, and I don't remember what the third one. It went on pretty long. And I also
Interesting.
was watching it, so.
Yeah, that's fair. If I had to guess, I would say that to me she kind of feels good in situations where there's like you're playing dive, but you're kind of scared of your Ana like getting walked at or killed. But also if there's like decent open space that she can rotate around. This is kind of my interpretation of her, because her right click especially is really good at like pressuring from afar. With
Yeah,
that.
when they played her on Lijiang Tower, they used like the open space to like get her out of the way of Winston or
Yeah.
she is.
Yeah.
So it was like where she could like fly out into the void area and be safe.
Oh,
Right.
oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
That's fun. So you're saying they were doing something like this? Yeah.
No, I can't see it, but yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. But yeah, so do you know what they were playing with her? Was it Lucio?
No, they were playing Ana.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, she's gonna have less peel, because she doesn't have any boop like Brig or Lucio does, but she does have utility, and she's a little greedier, right? Because she has more healing and more damage.
Yeah. They swapped between Ana and Kiriko.
Okay, that makes sense. Because when your Ana can't live, that's when usually you go Kiri. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Breen, are you intending to stream?
Oh my god, I'm not streaming? Oh my gosh. I'm so mad.
No, I just thought you were like in a game or something.
Oh my gosh.
So I thought
I'm so stupid. Oh well. Well, in the recording it was showing at least. That was where my mind got messed up. Okay. Yeah, so you can see all the characters here to kind of make it easier. So I'll briefly go over it again. So obviously just tanks are tanks. And then DPS for hit scan is like Ashe, Reaper, Sojourn, Cassidy, Soldier, some Symmetra, Tracer, Widow. And then hits or projectile / flex would be like Echo, Sombra, Genji, Hanzo, Torb, Venture, Junkrat, Mei, and Pharah. And then yeah, so oftentimes for another thing for the supports, oftentimes the flex support will be the more aim intensive character, because like over time, like the flex supports traditionally have been Ana, Baptiste, Zen, right? And I guess Kiriko as well, where a lot of these supports are more intensive on aiming, as opposed to like a character like Lucio, Mercy, Moira. Well, I guess Moira's flex technically still, but you get the idea. Where Brig is literally like a melee character with one skill shot that she does every couple seconds. Whereas this Baptiste, you know, my game is pretty laggy, so it's hard to demonstrate. But like, you're gonna be like flicking your heels like that. So it's pretty intensive character, right? So usually the flex support is gonna be the better aimer on average, just due to the way that the characters work. So that's why a character like Illari is usually played by the flex support, and sometimes there's even comps where you'll play like Baptiste Illari, and technically that might even be considered double flex, right? And that's where a lot of the newer characters that get released to the game start to break down some of the role understanding, where like in Overwatch 2, oftentimes it really is important just to like be a flexible player, but if you're playing on a team, knowing these basic guidelines are going to help you like determine which characters you need to practice the most. And if your team wants to play a comp that like is missing a character from your both of your guys' hero pools, then you can start having that conversation about like, okay, who's going to pick that up and who's going to play what. And it's always, when it comes to roles, it always comes down to what your individual team specializes in and can play. But those are the general guidelines that help you get started with understanding like what people are even talking about when they use these words, right? So that's the basic like gist of the main roles on a team. And then there's also something called a comms roles. Based on that name, can anyone guess what I might be thinking of? Comm roles. Like COM, like that. Well, first,
the people who are calling shots.
Yeah. Because what are comms, right? It's the things it's the way you communicate with your team, other than like pings and stuff throughout a match, right? When you're using Discord and speaking to your teammates. So comms rules are the sort of way that you stay on the same page as as your team. And so the two main ones that I can think of are ult tracking and fight planning. So starting with the first one, because it's the most self-explanatory, what do you guys think ult tracking is? What do you think that entails?
Tracking the enemy's ults.
Right. And so when do you think you'd want to be talking about the enemy's ults? Yeah. That's yeah, if you think that if they, so like in the most simple way, like the most fundamental role of an ult tracker is even more simple than that. It's literally like what ults do they have, and you call them in between every fight. Like when there's downtime, and not everyone's not like super focused on the fight, the ult tracker will usually step up and say, all right, they press tab and they look at the stats and they think about what happened in the match, and they're like, all right, they have beat, they have rampage, they're gonna use Genji, they have Genji blade, and that's it. And then, or like maybe if they're not sure, they might ask a question like, did they use blade this fight? Do they? And then if someone's like, yeah, they use blade, all right, and then you'd be like, okay, they have these two ults, right? Because in a team environment, you desperately, like a good team will know what options the enemy team has every single fight, right? Because how are you supposed to play around these big ultimates and not just lose to a random big button if you like don't even realize they have it in the first place, right? And it seems like one of those things that's super obvious, but if you are consistent about it as a team, the effects will be pretty strong, because that leads into the next comm role, which is like fight planning, which is usually saying like, okay, now that we know what ults they have, let's look at the ults that we have and let's start to make a plan based on the map situation and the game state to say, let's play in this way against their setup, and we'll try to like potentially use this ult this fight, right? You kind of usually you'll create like a detailed plan of being like, or it doesn't even have to be that detailed, but it's like, all right, we're gonna use this ult. If they use this, then we'll use this, right? You can keep it pretty simple, and the better you are, and the more understanding you have as a team of what playing around ults means, then like the less you'll have to say in the moment, because it's like you're calling a set play almost, like in football. You know, you're like, all right, well we're going for a blade, and we're gonna go aggro with blade. Okay, that means we're probably gonna be crossing chokes and like pressing speed amp and just Wing at them, right? So yeah, that happens in between fights as well, and usually that will be the person who. Usually the person who does the shot call or the ult tracking. Oftentimes that actually is the main support who does that, like traditionally, because as the main support, you spend the most time looking at your teammates, and you spend the most time like in the back, sort of paying attention to the enemies, and you start to realize like, oh, I just watched the enemy tracer farm my tank for about 3 minutes. She probably has pulse bomb. We gotta be careful of that. So that's why oftentimes it's the main support. But it can be anyone, really. I mean, as long as you get the job done, right? And then for fight planning, usually that's done by the main tank, because if you're a character like Winston, for example, I mean, just any tank, your jump basically is a declaration of initiation if you're jumping into the team, right? Now, obviously, as Winston, you don't have to jump on the enemy team. You can, like, say your target is, like, all the way over there. I can jump here, wait for my jump again, stage, wait. Okay, now I'm jumping over here. But if I'm the target caller, I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go. All right, I'm diving on this target. 3, 2, 1. And then you're like, now you're in, right? So the tank will dictate the pace of the fight, which is why oftentimes they have the best understanding of like how they want to take it, right? Again, it can be very flexible, where if someone on the team has an idea, like for example, say someone on the team is like playing Genji, if you guys have Dragon Blade in a fight, then you may want to like initiate that certain fight. Maybe like the Genji player says, oh, I have my blade this fight. I have an idea on how I want to use this ult, right? And then the team can listen and be like, all right, well, okay, then we're going to use this ult aggressively here. And so I'm like, all right, I want to go in 3, 2, 1. Right, and so the Genji can sort of dictate the pace of the play now, because he's got the strong ability that sort of lets him decide. That sort of thing comes down to the comfort of your team and how you want to take fights and make plans on plays, but oftentimes flexibility is pretty strong. It's just that's the general like concept that should be thought about when you're going for plans, right? And then there's another thing in comms as well, which is like when you're actually inside of the fight, mid-fight, right? There's target call, right? Who is dictating the target that is being selected to be shot at, right? Target calling and target selection and like focus fire is quite a difficult thing to master as a team, because oftentimes everyone is going to be seeing something different on the battlefield, right? And so a lot of people will want to say a lot of different things on which target to shoot. I promise you, even if it's like not the most optimal target, as long as you're shooting the same target, you're gonna get so much more value usually, right? So listening, oftentimes like it is the main tank who's again dictating the target, right? So like if you're not the quote unquote designated target caller, oftentimes it's a lot better for you to like listen as opposed to try and actively make that decision, right? And of course there are exceptions always, because like at any point in comms, if you notice something, right, then you should say like, oh, someone is split over here. Can we engage on this guy? Can we engage? And then usually there's some sort of conversation like, yeah, let's get him. And then you kind of go for that engage, right? Any questions so far on what we've talked about? Because that was a lot of information.
I love how ADHD this game is. Awesome.
Right? I love this game. Yeah, any questions so far on everything I said? That was a lot of information, I know, but all this was recorded, thankfully. So if you want to go back and look at it and really digest the information, it will be there for you. Oh, and then as for shot calling, or sorry, like target calling, occasionally your main tank will be dead, right? And so when that happens, it is necessary for someone to pick up the slack on target calling, especially in a fight that's really chaotic, and you just need to, like a little bit of target focus to sway the fight and kill someone quickly, right? Because so there's a lot of like there's rules, but there's always going to be heads up like exceptions that you kind of need to be able to stay on your toes. But practicing discipline is also really strong as well, at least to start. Where if you're like, okay, we're going to start out and say this guy's going to be our target caller, and we're just going to try and listen to that. And then oftentimes what you're going to find is that your target caller or your like the person who is making a call will be wrong. That will happen a lot, right? You shouldn't be afraid when you're practicing how to do these like comms rules to be wrong. That being wrong should like not necessarily even be a concern while you're playing the game, because you're not going to get better if you're not going to be wrong first, right? And so if you want to improve at these rules, what you have to do is like take note of the calls that you're making, or even like record yourself speaking while you're playing the game, right? Record yourself, and then you look at that footage later and you think, what did I say in that moment? So like, first of all, some of them are easier than others, right? You can literally go back into a replay and think, well, okay, I was the ult tracker, and I tracked that they had this ult this fight. Did they have that ult, right? And there's you can go on the wiki for the Overwatch. You can go on the Overwatch wiki, and you can actually see how many points it takes for each individual character to get their ultimate. And the points will equal like damage or healing. So you can actually, in Overwatch 2 especially, now that we have the scoreboard, you can literally look at the numbers and be like, oh, they did 3,000 damage, they have their ult now. Or even simpler than that, it's been 3 fights and I haven't seen this guy's ult. They have it. They do, right? So you can just at least expect the possibility that they're going to use it that fight, right? Or in a more complex note, when you take like target calling, or not target calling, well actually target calling as well, but if you take shot calling, where you're like, okay, based on this these ults and this situation, I want to try and take the fight this way. Oftentimes it's really impossible to determine what the right play would have been, because there's so many options, right? It comes down to picking one option that's going to beat your opponent right now, right? You don't have to pick the perfect one. And so that's kind of the thing where, like, unless you're playing against a really strong team that's forcing you to pick like really obscure options in order to like win, you really oftentimes shouldn't overthink the plan. It's better to just have one, because when inevitably you have plans that don't work, that's when you can go back, look at the gameplay, and think, well, this was my plan, and I thought this would work for this reason, right? You say that to yourself. But why did it not work? What part of my assumptions failed? What did I not expect to happen that did? And that's kind of how you build your intuition as a target caller of like, okay, now that I've seen this happen, I have a much better understanding of like how to deal with something like this in the future. Yeah. So really don't be afraid at all to be wrong. Because it's only going to be frustrating and uncomfortable if you don't take the time outside of the game to like check your assumptions when you're playing, right? Yeah. And that's kind of leads into like when you're playing on a team where someone's making these decisions for the team, right? The last thing you want to do is see someone's play that they're trying to set up with the team, think to yourself, that's a terrible play, and then go for something different. This isn't ranked, right? You are playing on a team, which means if you're going to fail, you're going to fail together, right? It's kind of like what I said earlier. Even if someone is on the wrong target, if there's at least 2 people on the wrong target, you're much, much, much more likely to get value than 1 person on the right target and 1 person on the wrong, right? So follow along with the call that's being made, and if you disagree with how it went, or or don't think it's going to work, then you need to have that conversation with the player outside of the game and say, I didn't think this was going to work, and it didn't, right? And honestly, a lot of times what may happen is you'll think it's not right, and then it'll happen, and then you'll be like, oh, wait, that actually worked. Like, sometimes you don't know it's going to work, right? You just got to try it. And that's where experimentation is really, like, useful as well. Because if you always play things by the book, then you're never going to, like, surprise your opponents, right? Sometimes, like, going for one flank play out of playing standard for the rest of the match is a really strong way to, like, get a free fight win. It's like, what if you go for like a surprise flank play when you don't have any ultimates and they do, and then you just get like a weird 2K for no reason, because you were in a situation where you were already about to lose, so you took a risk, right? Other than that, I think that's all I think that's a lot of information for now. I think that's a pretty good place to end it. Any questions for the audience? I'll give you guys some time to think about it.
Who's on tier 3?
Who's on tier 3? For Northwest Florida, so we have a lot of people here who are from other colleges. So I believe it's UWF, FSU Panama City, and Northwest Florida State College. As for the Northwest Florida State College tier 3, we're still doing tryouts over the next 2 weeks before we decide teams. There's a couple people who are ineligible to play for tier 1, which those people are basically guaranteed to be on tier 3. But other than that, it's still kind of up in the air. Off the top of my head, I can't necessarily think of anything. I will say that, like, mid-fight, like, having ideas mid-fight is one of the most complicated, like, completing actions in directing your team in the middle of a team fight is one of the most difficult things this game has to offer. And that's, there's so much that goes into it. There is actually, so there's types of comms as well, other that aren't just comms rules, I will say. Like, another type of comms is scouting, which is partial, and it's like a really big reason why mobility is good, period, is because the ability to see where the opponents are, right? So, like, say I'm Genji and I climbed up all the way to this high ground, I'm like, oh, they have a sniper here, 2 guys over here, and a guy there. Well, what we talked about earlier is we have a fight planner, right, who's trying to actively make the best decision as a team every single fight on how to take an engagement. The more information you have as to their setup, the more likely you are to come up with or to see a flaw in their setup and to exploit that weakness, right? So scouting is a really, like, crucial aspect of comms, where taking the time in between fights to, like, just say, hey, this is where they are. I can see their setup here. What if we go for this, right? That's a core aspect of, like, calming. That's really important. I will say, if you guys feel like you want to start practicing these things, these comms rules, definitely feel free to reach out to me, or as well, you can try to, like, I want to try and encourage this semester for players to kind of, like, solve problems with each other and to, like, say, oh, well, I want to practice this thing, but I really kind of don't know how. Like, I know it's good to do this, but how do I actually make myself better at it? I think it'd be great if you guys tried to sort of involve yourselves in the text chats in the server, so that we can kind of, like, start bouncing ideas off each other, so that we're not just trying to figure out everything on our own, you know? And of course, if you do that, then whenever I see something, I can always like help you guys out and like give my advice on something, right? Like, oh, I want to get better at target selection in mid fight, but I'm kind of lost after like trying to do it myself for a little bit. Do you guys have any like? And then the more specific questions you get as you kind of like try to figure it out yourself, the more specific questions that you have, the easier time it'll be to sort of have other people help come up with a solution, you know?
Are there certain things that you can like practice if you're just playing ranked? Because I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. A lot of our players don't have a lot of time outside of their classes, work, and stuff like that. Just
Yeah,
playing Overwatch.
sure.
We mostly just when we have practices, that's when we do it. I mean, we're not.
You're not.
We're not doing. We don't have a lot of like free time outside of that to do much, but some of us do, and so like if we want to practice that, inside of ranked, I'm not sure. Like especially with target acquisition and stuff, not everybody's going to be talking and stuff. So
Yeah.
what do you reckon might do?
Target selection is kind of a skill outside of comms as well, like in a ranked environment. Something you can try to do is like if you have like a tank and a DPS or like a tank and a support, then you could go on some, especially on certain maps, you can go with characters like Winston, Kiriko, and you can kind of just practice going for dives and like having that target selection, even in like a duo scenario or like trio. It's obviously not going to be as strong, and it's going to be a lot more awkward when you don't have the team helping you out. But you can at least build synergy with like small groups in ranked if you want. There's certain things that are easier to practice in a ranked environment than others. Like for example, I think what is it? Ult tracking is one of those things that everyone should be practicing in. Should always have everyone should have at least some understanding of how to ult track, right? Because even if you have a dedicated ult tracker in a team environment, in ranked you're not necessarily going to have that, right? So being able to do it yourself is pretty strong. And like practicing ult tracking is a completely individual task, because even if your team doesn't necessarily make decisions around the ult that you tracked, that you can at least say, well, I'm playing Ana and they have Nano Blade. Maybe I shouldn't play so far forward so that like when the Genji dashes up expecting me to be there, I still have like another 20 feet there so that I can like line up the sleep or at least force a deflect, right? Yeah, I would say when it comes to like the question of how to practice, it's the more specific that you have an idea of what you're trying to practice, the easier it is to find an answer. Because the question of like how do you practice period is like, well, it's gonna look different for what you're trying to practice. Yeah. And it will require some, like at least some level of creativity, right? And in my opinion, like whenever you have a practice goal, you can kind of go into if you like go into ranked, like for example, one of my players, Lux, right? They said, I want to practice. They felt like they had a blind spot on the kill feed, like reading the flow of a fight and saying, okay, well, I'm not even realizing half the time that someone on my team is picked. So they were like, okay, I've come up with a goal for myself that when I play ranked, I'm going to like say out loud every single person who died. And I don't care if I win or lose the match because this is what I'm practicing. And like having a practice goal is much more impactful than just like blindly playing ranked, in my opinion.
Yeah. Because sometimes, I don't know, you get those teammates who tilt you or try to tilt you or
Yeah.
the enemy will do the same thing. So it's just like, I always try to have that mentality too, where it's like, even if somebody is getting upset at you for doing something that you know that you're doing right, you don't argue with them. Like,
No.
it's not like that.
Well, and like if you're practicing something actively, the first thing that's going to happen is the rest of your gameplay is going to actively suffer. And you have to be okay with that. Because you know that when you're in performance mode and you're trying to, like, actually play the game, and you're not, like, forcing all your brain power to be on this one random thing, then, like, you're obviously going to play better. But you want to get better at this one specific thing so that you don't have to think about it later, right?
It's building habits.
Exactly.
For when you fall into it.
And if you play ranked to practice as opposed to playing ranked to, like, improve, you'll find that your rank will increase much more naturally, and you'll be much less, like, emotionally invested in your rank, so to speak, to the point where, like, you're, like, getting frustrated if you lose rank, right? Because the point of playing is not to gain more points. The point of playing is to get better, right? And when you get better, your rank will go up naturally. So you kind of have to be honest with yourself and be like, well, am I playing to improve, or am I just playing the game?
You said this is recorded because I missed all of it.
Yep, this is all recorded. I will put it on YouTube. I have a couple of other videos from years past of various things that I've discussed. It's kind of funny. I don't think I even talked about Poke Dive Brawl yet, which I kind of forgot to. I kind of got into the comms roles, and the roles pretty heavy. We still haven't, technically I said this would be an hour, so we do have another, like, what is it, 13 minutes? I could go very briefly into it. The good news is I do have a video on Poke Dive Brawl already, but I'll just go into it very briefly. So does anyone know what that is when I say that? Poke Dive Brawl. So what do you guys... Yes, those are those are like the fundamental play styles. And it can kind of get articulated in different ways, but they're archetypes of playstyles. So when I say poke, what do you guys think that means?
Widowmaker.
Yeah, Widowmaker is like the pokiest character in the game. So if you had to put it into words, what does she do?
It's nice from long range.
Right. She gets value from long range, right?
Yeah.
And so everything that goes along with getting value at such a long distance, like a Widowmaker wants to, like, ideally wants to play it at the max, the peak of her range, because, like, if that's a Junkrat over there, he has no chance of shooting me, right? So me getting this opportunity to one-shot him is, like, perfect. Is, like, a perfect situation for Widow, right? So poke characters like to get value just by whittling down and getting that value long distance, right? So what would a Brawl be? What do you guys think Brawl characters would do?
They fight. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They like big bursts of value up close, and they like to run you down, right? So, like, if I'm Reinhardt, I'm looking at my opponents right there. I can press shift, I can, like, pin this guy for a huge burst, and then, like, use my close range hammer to just, like, annihilate someone, right? But if I wanted to kill these guys, and I, like, stub my toe on this wall, and then they're already, like, around this corner because I've, like, missed my engage, I use my cooldown, I'm already at, like, a significant disadvantage because I'm kind of forced to, like, hold shield and have my resources get whittled away, right? So Brawl characters oftentimes like to have that huge burst of value where they get in someone's face, and, like, they want to close distance, and then, like, if I'm getting a bunch of damage is taken, and then I can go into this room, I can stabilize and get my resources back, but I need these, like, safe locations, otherwise I'm gonna be, like, struggling, right? Because I'm just gonna be stuck out in the open. So they're like, they like to play fast, but they're just usually more imposing, and they hold space better, right? Because, like, if I'm a Reinhardt standing in this room, there's, like, really not a character in the game that can stop me from doing this, right? Because I can, like, I can, like, the moment you walk into the room, you're taking 100 damage, and then I'm, like, double swinging you, so you're taking 200, and then I combo you. And then, like, before you even got, like, one shot on me, I did, like, 300 damage on you, right? So, but if I was gonna, like, try to deal with the Pharah in the sky, it's like, well, there's mobility and long-range damage, so it's like, oh, there's a slow-moving projectile that they just stepped to the side, and I did nothing, right? So these playstyles come down to where are the strengths and weaknesses of the characters, right? And then the last one would be dive. Does anyone have any idea of like what dive is?
Are they dive the backline or something like that?
Yeah, like that would be a dive, right? But what constitutes, like, what makes a playstyle divey? Like Winston. Yeah, oftentimes mobility is a core aspect of it, right? So what's like both Poke and Brawl like to run people down if they can, right? But the thing about Dive is that Dive has more opportunities to navigate the map space so that they can actually get on top of someone, right? But the trade-off is that when the Dive characters are up close, they're less imposing than like a Reinhardt would be. Because like if I was a Reinhardt, right, and I'm swinging at these guys, they're already dead by the time they're like half HP with the Winston, right? Now, Winston is like, still, he's not terrible, like his damage isn't terrible, but there's a lot more time for them to respond and get away, right? So dive is often more times about like forcing map space, map control, and not necessarily about getting kills outright. Now that being said, so like there's a sort of interplay between the three playstyles, especially certain characters that tend to be like caricatures of the playstyles, right? So like the sort of rock paper scissors, that the basic rock paper scissors goes dive beats poke, poke beats brawl, and brawl beats dive, right? That's the sort of basic fundamental concept, right? Where like if I'm playing Winston, Genji, Tracer into Reinhardt, Cassidy, Mei, like Baptiste, Lucio, right? If the Winston comp tried to walk into that Rein comp, like on a head-to-head, one angle, just straight up fight, the Winston comp will lose like most of the time unless ults are a factor, because the straight up output in a close range fight is going to be higher from the Rein team usually, right? So that's why like Brawl tends to like beat dive, because if they play stacked together, then there's really no fight. Then like map space doesn't even necessarily matter, because the Brawl team is just gonna like force objective and force you to make a move and get close to like the threatening damage, right? And then the reason that Poke beats Brawl is because if I'm playing like Widowmaker, right? I'm sitting up on this high ground, my Sigma's over here, and then and then I have like an Ashe on that high ground, right? If the Ryan is standing right here and he's shielding me, then like my Ashe from that angle is gonna have a shot on him. Or if he goes to shield my Ashe, then I have a separate angle to go kill him. Oftentimes the Brawl teams are very one-dimensional, literally, in the sense that unless the fighting takes place in a long straight corridor, like is there an example I can show? Like, if this was my only angle and there was a Reinhardt standing in front of me, then yeah, the Brawl team is going to be able to like potentially close this distance against me, right? But oftentimes there's more than one angle on a map, which means like simply me standing here dictates half of what a Brawl team can do, because they just cannot peek me as Widow, right? And then finally there's the last, which is like dive beats poke, and that comes down to the same situation where there's like an Ashe on this high ground. If I'm Genji, then I can play sort of independently and use my mobility to like take a flank, and then like when the moment comes in the Widowmaker, like maybe she doesn't see me, then I can just come up here with my mobility and just fight her, right? Because even if I don't kill her, I force her off this angle, where now the rest of my team is like, all right, now that we forced her out, we have this entire map space that she's no longer controlling. Now we can do stuff, right? So the mobility allows you to like say, hey, they're threatening on these long angles, right? But like if I'm playing Tracer, if I'm playing Tracer, right, and the Widow's controlling, like, if the Widow's standing right there and she's controlling this lane, then I can just use 2 blinks, and there's literally, she has to basically predict where my head will be for, like, 2 frames if she wants to kill me. Not really happening, right? Like, a severe disadvantage for the Widow. Now that being said, there's always the opportunity for, like, a Widow to, like, just hit that random headshot. But that's generally how the interplay between the 3 playstyles will work. And so, any questions on that before I sort of, like, add to that a little bit? Does that all seem to make sense? Okay, okay. For a lot of you guys, or who have, like, been with me before, you'll know that this is, like, one of the first things I always talk about. So it shouldn't be much of a surprise. So, there's some characters that are caricatures of, like, this poke, brawl, dive playstyle, right? Where Widow's like, okay, obviously I want to headshot people from an angle, right? But most characters in the game, the playstyles are relative to the other characters that you're playing against, right? So, like, if I'm playing, for example, Venture, right? And there's a Reaper right here. Like, even though Venture has a lot of, like, high burst, close range damage, right? Like this, right? I don't, unless I, like, am actively using my abilities to brawl, which I can do, I still have advantage in a poke, where if I'm standing here and the Reaper's standing there, I'm getting more damage than that Reaper is doing to me, and I'm playing out, like, at a further distance than him. In a sort of micro level, I'm poking him, right? And it even goes further. If I'm standing on this high ground and the Reaper's down here, it's like the same thing. I can shoot him, right? And I'm poking him out, right? So being able to find an interplay between playstyles and realizing which is good in which situation is always really important. Because, like, at the same time, if the Reaper used his Wraith form and, like, doesn't have a teleport and he's just sitting there, then me as Venture, I'm sitting on this angle, but that doesn't change the fact that I can't just do this to him right now, right? So, what playstyle will work depends on the cooldowns that have been used and what you can get away with. But that's just the fundamental way to understand your options, usually, right? And, like, oftentimes the beginning of a match is you get what's called the poke phase, where, like, teams don't just start out right in front of each other, right? There's usually at least some sort of interplay between, like, alright, well, I'm going to stand on a good position and shoot them until, oh, this guy's 1 HP, now I'm going to go in for my brawl engage, right? So it's not necessarily, like, even if you're a brawl playstyle, like, if both teams are somewhat brawly, you kind of have to figure, like, okay, well, should I go for at least a slight poke before I brawl? Should I wait to force 1 cooldown? Or do I need to just run at them, like, relentlessly and make something happen? And that can come down to a lot of, like, really small details, and that's where a lot of skill expression comes from. Yeah. Or, like, a really interesting example is that, like, say I'm playing Tracer, right? I use my recall, and then I, like, triple blink into here. Notice how I can't blink, nor can I recall, right? I have nothing. I'm just kind of walking like a normal person. Well, if I was playing Ashe, right? And normally, like, poke beats, or normally poke is beaten by dive, right? But if that Tracer just walks right here, and she uses all her recall and her blinks, and she's just barely playing cover in front of me, well, then I'm just gonna walk into her and just brawl her, right? Because I have my coach gun and my dynamite that allows me to brawl her, basically, right? So staying flexible and realizing the opportunities that are coming to you, that is what determines which playstyle you play. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. That's basically it, though. Basically finished in exactly an hour. Isn't that awesome?
I do have one question. If they do change to 6v6, how do you think all this would, like, change up? Because I feel like all the characters that they come out with are basically built around being 5v5 at this point.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's one of those things where it's like, I actually like the balance team enough to say, hey, whatever they decide to, like, try out, I have a feeling it'll at least be interesting. But I can't exactly say for certain what I expect them to try either. In my experience with 6v6 in Overwatch 1, ironically enough, the playstyles that I mentioned here were actually much more, what's the word? They tended to be a lot more decisive differences, where like if you're playing, although it was also the fundamentals of the poke dive brawl were also messed up, because if you look at like a character like Orisa in Overwatch 1, she had a shield, right? And she had the ability to pull people together, which means she gets a lot of value in the poke, because standing far away, she gets to shoot you, and she gets to like set up a bunch of burst damage from afar, right? But her problem as a character was that when the fight actually happened up close, she had Fortify, one of the best brawling abilities in the game. Like, what? Who decided that? Why was this in the game for so long? So like, as long as the fundamentals aren't like broken like that, then it's the same, right? And I'm sure whoever played Overwatch 1, you guys know what I'm talking about, where you're playing Reinhardt into Orisa, and it's like, what am I doing with my life?
It's awful. It was awful.
Yeah. So yeah, these are the fundamentals, and they should stay the same, even 5v5 to 66. That did not work. But yeah, that's basically it. Any questions? Any characters that you guys aren't sure about, like, what their abilities would be like, sort of, like how a certain typical playstyle of a character?
I mean Cassidy.
Yeah.
Well, what is he? Brawl?
He's a hybrid between Poke and Brawl. He's a lot more brawly though, I would say. Especially because recently they nerfed his fall off range.
Oh.
Where, notice how I'm not doing full damage. Not doing full damage. Not doing full damage. That'll kill, right? Let's see, how much compared to like, yeah. So like, it's like 20 meters is when the fall off starts, I think. So like, he's very brawly at this. He's brawly, but he's also pokey at this range too, right? Because as the cast, like I can do a lot of damage just sitting here, but then if I like tap you twice and then you go around like this corner, right? Then I don't mind just like rolling and like flashbanging to like finish the kill, right? So he's the sort of mix of the both, and like, but like it comes down to what characters are you playing against, right? Because if I'm Cass and there's an Ashe on this high ground, well then it's like, it kind of sucks to just poke at this range, because like I can poke her, right? But I have to be a lot smarter about it than she does, because if I peek and I headshot her and she headshots me, she's gonna do more damage to me. So it's like, maybe I like peek once and then just roll out of the LOS, so that I'm playing corner to corner, which is actually, it's a very brawl heavy playstyle, is to go corner to corner, right? And then like, I can like play out of her LOS, right? But then like if she tries to peek, maybe I go for like a weird brawl thing where I just like throw this at her and like try to get a kill in my range, right?
That makes sense.
But then if they have a Reaper, I don't want to just walk up to him and let him do like 100, 200 damage per shot, right? Unless I can like walk up to him and like do this, which is still good, like that's still a threat to him, right? Oftentimes it's just a lot easier to like maintain at least a little bit of distance and then force him out, right? Because if you force the Wraith, that's when you're usually more scary than the Reaper, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if you want to like learn more about like how should I play this character, you can take these fundamentals, and then I would actually recommend looking at your games, and then like when you're playing the game, look at the enemy team comp, look at their setup, look where they're playing, and think to yourself, what playstyle is it easiest for me to get value with right now? Like, what is the threat especially? And throughout a match, you'll start to realize like, hey, the Reaper on the enemy team is doing a lot of damage, right? Maybe I should play in a way that makes it hard for him to do something, right? Like playing on a high ground where he like above where he's trying to engage, right? That would be an example, right? Because like if my supports are standing like down here all the time and they're getting like flanked by a Reaper, if I stand up here, then like I'm just gonna be shooting that Reaper even with reduced damage, much more than he can do to me, right? It's kind of funny.
When they changed the stun.
The stun, they
Yeah.
it was like a season or two ago. It's still a hinder, but it does the same. It does like the flashbang motion that Overwatch 1 had. I think it's a good change. The old hinder was like you were praying every time you threw it out that it would do something.
I think it's a lot better now.
I agree. It's taken me a while to get used to it, but I think it's a good change. But yeah, don't discount the cast like brawl damage of just like fan hammering. You still need good timing because you're left like vulnerable with no ammo, right? But it's still pretty strong. The funny thing about Cass actually, when the game released in 2016, he basically had the range that like Widowmaker and Ashe do now. It was pretty stupid. Like you were playing like it was like Cass only on Gibraltar, which is so stupid. Because like even at this range, he was like full damage headshotting people.
I miss days.
Plus, like he just has a stun, by the way, so it's like okay, you can't get close to him, nor can you play afar. Awesome. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, the range nerfs are definitely impactful.
Yeah, I would say hit scan has always been like really strong in Overwatch, and they've been slowly like nerfing the hit scans, where like they've nerfed Cast, they've nerfed Sojourn, and if you look at pro play, guess what they're playing? The one that hasn't been nerfed. Yeah. But anyway, that's.
I did see Cassidy the other day, but that was only on Renasafi.
Yeah, Cass isn't bad. He's just he's more situational than he was before, which isn't saying much because he's still really good. Because like the thing was, Cass was competing with Sojourn for the spot of hit scan, right? And there was a couple situations where he was already beating her out, but Sojourn was just so unbelievably busted that like it kind of didn't matter, because her headshot did like 240 damage still, right? Now the headshot does 200, so you're much less likely, even with the body, like especially with a body shot, to just like tap someone, and unless you have like follow up. Yes. Well, that's basically it for this time for today. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask. But that's all.
Thank you.
Play a game,
For
guys.
doing this. Yeah.
Thank you for the lecture.
Yeah, of course. I hope to do more of this throughout the semester. I hope to do pugs. I hope to do ranked days, kind of like how we were doing over the summer. I appreciate you guys all coming because it gives me more energy and inspiration to actually like put effort into it. So much appreciated to you guys as well. I'm gonna go ahead and start the recording, or stop the recording now.